Welcome back to another episode of the Sacred Seat podcast. My name is Melanie, and today is a first on the podcast. Alana and I are joined by my oh-so-dear mother, Tammy. So Tammy is a pivotal role in my life, obviously, but Alana has spent a great deal of time getting to know my mother as well, as she is the steward of the land that we host and hold a lot of our ceremonial retreats on. She is an artist, a homesteader, a mother, a nurse, a death doula, a creatrix, a friend, a mentor, and a very kind, lovely lady. And we are very excited to welcome her here to the podcast.
Well, thank you.
Welcome, Tammy.
Here. Thanks, Amanda.
Today we're going to be covering a breadth of topics as we always do, but we've been called to focus a lot on the connection of nature and play. And because you are the hostess with the mostess and the steward of all ceremonial land experiences thus far, I wanted to start with talking about your call to purchase the land that you have come to refer to as Tamtera, and the innate importance of nature in that journey for you to where we are now. Tell us a bit about that. Who you are, how you got here, why the land is important.
That's a very big question.
It is a big question.
It's a huge lifetime of experience, but I think it all spawns from just the memories of having thoroughly enjoyed my childhood in nature and the connectiveness that I felt as a child. I moved around in many places and got to experience different ecosystems in different places like farms and oceans and mountains and cities and villages. So at a young age, being connected outside was really pivotal. And I think it was my solace, my fun place, that place of discovery and adventure.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because you can see, it makes me think of how when you live somewhere with the same view, you start to lose your appreciation of that view. So when you're someone who has lived in nature, has been very connected to nature, which is what I would personally relate to, it can be hard to notice its impact on your life until you're like removed from that situation, or someone else comes to your home or comes to the forest and really reintroduces the exceptional experience that it is to be in nature. Because on one hand, it's very natural and it's our normal state, but on the other hand, a lot of us are not connected or in nature or get to experience that freedom and that home sense when in nature.
It's that sort of like they say, you don't really know what you have until you don't have it, and then you get to, the value increases. You see it differently.
Alana, did you grow up in the forest much, or were you more of a city person? I know you also have a history of moving around quite a bit.
Yeah, I'd always been kind of a city person, always lived in the suburbs, but I did have this one home in my childhood where we backed off onto a massive ravine, and I was probably, I think, ages like 8 to 13, and I spent every waking moment I could exploring that space and being outside. A lot of my aunts and uncles also had acreages with horses, and they did the more homestead thing. So I had aspects of it where I was able to connect, but it actually wasn't really until I found plant medicine that I feel like I really deeply reconnected back to nature and see it completely differently. And that's thanks to the beautiful land at Tamtera. So I'm really grateful to you, Tammy.
Because it was a big part. Like, I was born in the coast of BC. So down near Vancouver area. And you moved my older brother and I out to the property when I was 9 or 10. Why was that such an important thing for you to do? Like, what was the main motivation in your search and journey to find land?
Just a whole bunch of synchronistic things coming together. It was the perfect time in the, the life path of the marriage, because my husband at the time was retiring from the military, and for the first time in like 15 years, we got to decide, where do we want to live? And that had been on our mind for quite some time as he served overseas, and we'd been to Quebec again, different beautiful different learning experiences about different environments and ecosystems and surroundings. So coming back to BC and getting to decide where we get to live, there was a certain definite list of criterion as to if, for a pre-retirement. So land, it was a process of elimination, and a beautiful gift of driving back across Canada, choosing where we want to be. And having been a BC girl from my mid-20s or mid-teens, I guess, we came back to BC. I just knew we both wanted to be in BC. This is where we met and married. So we landed back in Chilliwack, in the rainforest. And from there, we lived 10 years, and I could see the encroachment of Vancouver coming down the Fraser Valley, and the kids were growing. So what a beautiful opportunity to decide where do we want to live now, because he had the opportunity to have us moved all the way back to Quebec where he had enlisted. So Canada was wide open in choices. And so bing, bing, bang, no BC, sports, leisure, entertainment, nature, property. I had this deep knowing that I just wanted to get dirt under their feet and blue sky above them. The cities had encroached into the Fraser Valley so much in the 10 years I lived there. I couldn't imagine what another 10 years would do. And we were young, and it was just an opportunity of growth and change. And so doing the research.
I think it's interesting too that you had all of the options, like that I think is like the call to the hero's journey kind of thing, where you're just going to go out and set out on this adventure. But it sounds like you chose this place intentionally. So it wasn't just the call back to land, period. It was a call back to this land, which I think speaks to, like you just said, that energetic knowing or a deeper sense of calling to be on this specific piece of property. And I know there's many different synchronicities that led you to find this land that we are currently filming this in the dining room of and host ceremonies on frequently.
Yeah, it was an amazing unfolding. And I think for me in that journey was to be mindful not to get ahead of myself and make things happen, but to allow things to unfold before me. When these were these synchronistic meetings of people in Chilliwack, when I was recertifying as a nurse, I met a person in the hospital who was actually from this area. And he told me the big story as to why he came here and all the different options, and I should check it out. And he gave me his business card, and it sat on my dresser for 2-3 years, but it was always just sort of like, oh, got to check it out. Again, laying down the goals, the desires of having, a place to retire with dirt under our feet. There was this hope of and a goal of a family retreat and spa, something like that, to share the land.
So that was there from the beginning for you in some way?
Always, because it was going to be the retirement lifestyle, and what a great gift, because now having chosen to do that based on I just knew this is where I needed to be. It was just the retirement lifestyle and the gift to be able to share that.
How's retirement going?
I know.
It's like, it's a lot of work, hey?
I could never see myself truly retiring, like in that sense of what just like, I don't know what that really means, because I'm a busy person and I like to be busy. And if I'm going to be busy the rest of my life, what is it I love doing? And so again, a beautiful coming together of so many things.
Building a life you don't need a vacation from.
Mm-hmm.
True.
I love that. I love that. And I love that story, Tammy. I'd never really heard you speak about it that way. I feel like you said something, though, that's really potent. It was like you chose this place. I mean, we've covered that a couple different ways, but so many people don't really get the choice to be in nature. There's so many people nowadays that are just so disconnected from nature and don't really get to experience the benefits. Like, if you've never really experienced it fully, the gifts it has to offer, do you feel this is a big piece in what's missing and why there might be disease in today's world?
Oh, most definitely. I think when we look at the science behind us as humans and the neurobiology and the energy science is it's 100%. We are part of nature. We're energy. We flow with nature. It flows through us. Being connected and grounded in nature is the most healthiest, easiest, freest, simplistic thing we can do.
It's crazy because sometimes I know when that's not what you're used of, it does not feel that way. Like there's like a shift that happens when you take someone, you unplug someone, if we want to use the Matrix analogy here, you unplug someone from the program or the rat race, the busyness, and you put them in nature. It takes some recalibration.
Oh, yes.
And
especially out of cell range. Like people think we live out in the middle of nowhere. And that's amazing because we don't.
I do tell people that.
Well, they feel like we do, but it's a disconnect, right? And there's truly a disconnect, I think, even in how much electromagnetic field stuff is going on out there, right? Because I feel it when I go into the city, and when we come back here, it's like, there's
what's the energetics of it? If everything is a frequency, which I know us at Alchemia is how we view the world, is everything has an energetic frequency, has a current, and you can transfer that over to literally the electrical systems that you re-enter into when you're in a city. And there is a big shift that occurs when you get used to feeling what your body feels like, what your own energetics feel like when you're removed from the city. And I think if you never have the opportunity to be removed from an urban area where there's cement and big buildings and hundreds of other peoples and cars and buses and 20,000 different competing Wi-Fi signals, if you're never outside of that density of energy, not in a negative sense, but in like it's just full of energy. If you're not removed from all of that, you don't really ever experience your own frequencies or the frequencies that might lie outside of that spectrum. And I think that's the rhythm of nature, that cyclical living, that slowing down and being connected to like an earthen energy that we've really experienced being out here and that you've talked about often.
Yes, I think it's just a calmer, more gentler, like grounded energy.
I was gonna say grounded.
Yeah, because and the space too, I think. There's just the lack of interference in the audio spectrum and visuals, and we get excited when a car goes by. Car, right?
Well, it's interesting that you said space because Alana and I just did a podcast episode on integration, and we talk about getting into nature and providing yourself with space just to feel your own energetics, your own emotions, and have your own thoughts without the constant input that we receive in society. And I know that that's a big piece, at least in my integration process. Alana's discussed this as well, but the space required just to have that energy stem more from within you as opposed to outside of you being put on you or being, whether it's through media, friends, what you see when you're on the tram or the bus. I don't know why I said tram. But that's fine.
City Link.
Yeah.
Yes. No, because we are such an innate integral part of nature. To me, I've always viewed it as not as taking these things off of me and away, like out of my space,
unraveling,
instead of removing it from the innate connection we have. So we know these things. We know about digital detox. We know about clean foods. We know about clean water. Fresh air, exercise. These things are pretty, I think, just to me, integrate them into my daily lifestyle, and that's less I have to worry about as far as gym memberships and health food stores. And
well, it's a lifestyle pivot. It's not a morning practice. It's not a spiritual practice. It's not a 5-week challenge. It's in order to live in alignment with a certain frequency, your lifestyle pivots and changes, which I think for any long-term change, we can maybe all agree that it kind of has to. That's what integration, I think, means, which is just interesting to see how much we can say, like in that integration comment, we just said, oh, get out in nature, get out in nature. But I feel like this podcast is breaking down why just get out in nature is such a pivotal part of remembering who you are as an individual without those layers of programming or energetic influence.
And I think nature's a beautiful, affirming connection that quickly gives you that reality. It doesn't take much to go to a city park or to even go to the plant section of a hardware store.
Yeah, those feel good.
Especially in the winter, and do a little botanical tour of the pet stores. There's spots, there's little meccas everywhere out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I just guess I connected young and early, and I enjoyed that, and I was aware of where that came from. But just in nature, there's so much exploration and discovery, and the fun of seeing new things and seeing how the biology of life is so interconnected. And there's so much that's like metaphorical to just our human lives.
Yeah, the parallels.
The parallels to the cycles of life, all life, and the integration of like the food forest web and the micro biospheres and the macros. Just It's beautiful. It's just fractal and real, and
it's the original teacher too, if you think about observing those patterns.
And the lessons that it can teach you. This one thing I had put like a road sign is, welcome, come to Tamtera, but sticks are pokey, rocks are hard, and gravity always wins. It's just those natural laws of nature, and we learn them when we just out there. It's a great companion.
I think for me, what's interesting is like growing up in the city, like I wasn't as connected as, you, Melanie, and, your brother. For me, it's like, I almost viewed it like as work to be out in nature, like, oh, I gotta go camping, like all the things you gotta do to set up, and just see the work. And I think being up on your land, it really allowed me to really connect back into that play, into that like, oh my God, this is fun and explorative, and like that child in me that like needed to remember that like, oh, this is also important, and it's so joyful, and it feels expansive, and like all that you said about, the energy field, absolutely, like, just my nervous system doesn't feel as calm as I do up on your land, like it's a beautiful place to be. And I think the funny thing is the amount of people that have like completely forgotten that. And, we've tried to mimic, with other things, with just like when you said exercise, you go to a gym, but it's like, it's not the same, as being out in nature. Yes, is it, helping support your body for sure, but is it, what's better, and why would we why do we lean more towards one than the other? Usually it's like, we want to do less work. We want the convenience. We want the quick fix, and nature doesn't really work that way. Like you said, it has laws, and like you have to, work with that. And I think that's, it's gritty work. And it's important that we realize, I think, that our inner spiritual journey is also gritty work. It's not just airy fairy light and all the good things, right? It's a balance of those forces.
I hear it's a lot of that, like, it just reminds me of that saying, like, chop wood and carry water. That still has to occur, and someone gets to do that on our spiritual journey. So, and that's
the involution versus, I think, evolution, and what I view and consider a feminine approach to growth or advancement or progress or shifts on a spiritual journey is like the more feminine approach would be to journey inward and downward into grounding, into earthened practices, into rewilding, into being very in tune with Pachamama, Mother Gaia, the earth, the soil, what is here, as opposed to the westernized version of spiritual ascension that so many people have turned to these days, which is, let me raise my frequency to then transcend and get out of this human experience, which ironically we signed up to come here to have. So it's really been a focus and a learning and a new understanding and play field for me to realize why I value and love earth and food and the human experience of the opportunity to exist here and to be on this plane and to learn lessons and advance and grow and change and shift through those practices, as opposed to trying to just transcend the experience of being human. There's a lot in that conversation, which I think is why I really wanted to have the conversation centered around nature, creativity, and play, especially with you and Alana today, because it's been pivotal into my raising, like how I was raised. You were my mom. I have been on this land since I was 11. I was away, but I've moved back. So it's been a really fundamental part of my life. And I, in many ways, especially in my early 20s, took that hugely for granted. I did not know that that was not the norm. And I think it did a lot of things for me to really understand the difference between an involution and traveling inward and utilizing those skills and that deep knowing I have in that frequency of earthened grounding practices compared to a lot of individuals who might have been raised in cities who are trying to strive to escape some type of thing. And it's more of a ascension, more masculine driven, more cognitive and more mental. And I think, of course, you need both. But the being raised in nature and anchoring back into those grounding practices is something that has been like pivotal in developing me as a human and my approach to spiritual growth at large. I mean, we put it into Alchemia, Alana, because we were so intentional about integrating embodiment, empowerment, this capacity to have that grit and perseverance for the human experience we signed up to be here. This is not about escaping that. And I think that's something I really value and can hugely attribute to you, Mom, and your choices you've made for the family when you made those.
I can see how I've always viewed us, I think it's maybe because of my nursing, like we're humans, we're human beings. We are sensory beings. We absorb the vision, audio, olfactory, smells, tactile. That's the integration process of the spiritual and the body. I think it comes back to that whole trilogy, body, mind, and spirit. We are definitely a body. We definitely have a mind, and we definitely, well, we are spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's that integration of all of our senses and to feed those.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really easy to do in nature, I find.
Mm-hmm.
Art.
Alana, I know we've talked about that masculine and that feminine dynamic before. Do you have thoughts on that involution and evolution kind of dynamic?
I definitely feel like the body is such an important part of that. And yeah, like when you're talking about, density, the physical form is the densest, right? And, nature exists in physical form. It is everything that is just manifested from spirit in physical form before our eyes through the process of evolution. But, it was and so, yeah, I do feel that as a society, we've kind of like really disconnected from that. And my journey has been all about the body. It's been my greatest teacher in my life. And yeah, it's through the body that we evolve. And, the irony is it takes all of our effort to not want to want to escape it. Like I understand why we shy away from that, like those wounds that we get as children and the protection mechanisms we create, the different belief systems we take on. I understand that is why, but it is so important that we have to go back through. We have to go back to these places. We have to go back through. And so this is why I think nature and childhood, usually almost everybody has some sort of magical story, at least. I mean, I can't compare mine to your childhood where it was just so immersed, but everyone has this like magical story that can come up where they connected to nature. It's so innate. A child at the beach, just like, you take my niece and nephew to the beach when they're here, they're 4 and 7, and they just like, they know what to do. They're like, this is like heaven. Like I get to just like play and everything, but the world is my oyster. I get to be free. And it's innate within us. But yet, the seriousness and the heaviness of life also sets in. And then, we don't want to go there, and it's funny how we forget. And so I do feel that, yeah, this like that masculine, that feminine, that involution, that evolution. I think it's like those polarities, they just naturally exist in nature. And we work with them, and that's a part of the creativity. That's a part of the creative force, really, right? Those polarities. And so, yeah, I think that that's a big piece of the puzzle there for sure.
I know that for me personally, nature became inseparable, and in no way could I remove what I just consider real life at this point. I just refer to nature as real life. When I'm outside digging up potatoes, that's real life. When I'm online bidding for a weird share on a market or something, that's just not real life in my mind. And that's how I've become I guess, programmed in a certain way that this is a lot of the framework I work with. But because of that, I think being in nature is almost like having a second, it's our mother beyond our mother. So I feel like to a certain degree, you're stewarded in nature to learn, to be fostered in that childlike growth, right? Because I can't think of any time that I spent in nature with any group of friends or any group of kids or any group of adults that there is not a certain level of playfulness that eventually emerges. And I think it's just that long, like that bird's eye view of the fact that you're so held in utter permission and acceptance when you're in nature, that is the abnormality that causes humans to experience such healing, quote unquote, healing potential, when in reality, you're just given radical permission to show up and be entirely yourself because you are so held, because you are part of nature, you are her, you are not separate from her. And it's that dissolving of that separation when you're back in nature, I think that emerges that inner childlike play for discovery, for excitement, for creativity, because you feel safe to show up in a planet that up until then might have given you strife for doing so.
Mm-hmm. I like that, because it just reminds me of sort of a fundamental, verse that I heard, and it was about how if anyone questions the glory of nature and creation and the miraculousness of it all they need to do is sit out in nature under the skies and the stars, and there would be no room for excuse, because it is just so grand. It's just dissolves you. Like the mystery is the mystery. And I've just seen it, experienced it, and I see that in other people who get to experience that. And that's just if that's a gift I can give by just saying, come on over, or come, it's just, what a lovely thing to share. And it's, because it's in the Japanese practice of forest bathing, they talk about how just time in nature and reconnecting to that's become quite a practice in many schools. And so, but I like how they describe it, that the forest is the therapist, and I would just be the guide to help you to see it and to experience it, to maybe have some practice in reconnecting and the science behind the biology of what you're experiencing, because there's incredible biochemical exchanges going on with the human body. It's beyond us. We're just part of it.
Well, and that's the dissolving aspect.
Yeah.
Is these energies are interacting with you, like you are held. You are not separate than the mycelium underneath your feet that are sending your pulse to the tree over there. Like, you are innately part of it. And I think that is something humans are not used to experiencing anymore. It's like, no, you have a place here. You are part of nature. You are not separate from anything. It is all connected. And that's something that, in reality, in the larger scheme of things, is fundamental and basic. But we have so removed ourselves from it that it seems so complicated and earth-shattering that spending time outside in nature connects you to something bigger than yourself.
But I think these are a lot of the knowings that we have in our ancient myths and stories about how, grandmother's cedar tree can hold you, because biochemically she literally does. And I think it's nice that we can understand it through those stories, or through a biological lens, or through a childlike discovery, or just a somatic sense of that being held in a grove of cedar trees feels. You can,
those shamanistic rebirths where they bury you and then you get to come back out. It's a little extreme, but you're pretty held when you're buried in dirt. Don't try that at home, folks.
No.
Please don't tell anyone I recommended that. That is not what that was.
I've never seen that.
That leads me to our one of our next questions, I think, is what has called you to hold space and or host ceremonies on Tamtera? Because that's not something that everyone is willing to show up for. And I know that there is so much power in setting and safety and intentional space holding, something Alchemia as a whole talks about a lot. So what called you to, I guess, connect those dots of being in love and in tune with nature and wanting to share that with people in the capacity of holding space?
Juicy.
That's a huge question, but I will try to encapsulate it quickly. Being quite aware that I was on my own healing journey well before I had my children, I knew that I could change things and break cycles. And I really wanted to be able to raise my family first in a place of more harmony between body, mind, and spirit. I had become quite aware of those three realms of our existence, and dove deep into each realm: the mind, the spirit, the body, balancing all of that. Came to understand and study, became a nurse in the mid 80s, worked in um, medical surgical nursing, then had kids.
So that caregiving, showing up for people.
Yeah, and just seeing the holistic balance of the biological, psychological, and sociological aspects of all humans, and knowing that disease and health and wellness was a balancing of all of these factors, not just a
Holistic.
biological. Or so yeah, it was wonderful. And then actually applying a lot of this stuff that I learned just in my own journey, and then seeing how I could transfer those skills into parenting, and then knowing that we are all humans and we all are basically the same, and we all sort of have the basic human needs, and just this dynamic of understanding, like the circles got bigger and bigger, and that we're all the same and we're all similar but very different, and we can all connect and grow. And yeah, but just the biology, psychology, sociology of humans I studied well. I don't know. What's the question now?
What led you to want to hold space on the land? But what I'm hearing when you say all of that is, like someone you enjoy listening to, Dean Graciosi, says, is you took your mess, turned it into a message, because these are the things and the tools and the dynamics you've utilized in your journey.
100%.
And then the next step, especially because you're so anchored in caring for people and observing objectively the dynamics of what's going on in a holistic health perspective and wellness perspective, you just progressed to your natural next step for you as a person, which is sharing that.
Well, and I think too, I remember back then coming to realize that if I've got these skills as a nurse, that just basically return on investment. I'd rather raise healthy children than help fix broken adults. And what a glorious thing to do. And where would that be most beneficial? To instill health, wholeness, healing in young children, that discovery, exploration, connection, because that was just all a natural thing that kids do. And then young adults, and we did too. We were active and camping and skiing, fishing.
You just end up viewing everyone like they're a baby, and you meet the baby's needs.
Yeah. And especially now, because that all evolved into psychedelic psychotherapies and end-of-life existential suffering, because I did get to work in end-of-life care, and I really value the whole life cycle of even the human journey and the gifts that are available at every stage of life. And it was, it's been a whole full circle integration of just these different sciences that I studied up in, and to realize that it's pretty simple. We're all pretty much the same. We're all born upside down and naked under the Creator, God first. We all get planted in different places. We all have our basic human needs for love, connection, belonging. They're innate. Our connection, we're part of nature. I think life's pretty simple. We can really complicate it. No, I learned so much in my journey to know that less is more.
Love that. Love that.
The healing that just comes over a cup of tea with a friend is, to me, probably one of the most powerful thing, that honest, free connection. Just to
Tell
be
me
with.
about I noticed you, like, it sounds like you've really been on this like healing inner child journey, and that you've been creating space for your children to have the best childhood. And I know in a lot of the work, like you said, you view people as little babies, and so you're kind of like holding space for this inner child journey within. How has plant medicine been a part of your inner childhood journey?
I only came to really looking at plant medicine as a spiritual healer and a co-friend in healing in my about 15, 20 years ago when I started hearing about the effects of psychedelic therapies for end-of-life existential suffering. And that was profound. But I instantly knew that they were onto something because it was coming out of Switzerland. And I think the general sort of, whatever, paraphrasing, it was like for the first time, individuals were able to see that there were options, that they were part of a bigger story, that things happened, but like, but they didn't cause them to happen, that there was this space, that there was this comfort, this knowing that people would come back with, that there was a bigger beyond. And to maybe for the first time to imagine a difference in their life is like a profound statement, because I have a very active imagination. And when I started to learn that some people don't, I was so saddened to imagine that, because
So it gives them that perspective, and that was one of the main benefits in end of life care for sure.
Mm-hmm. So often, and then over the years, studying more and more, seeing how the great benefits of it were actually, and now we're integrating it into this medicine fields of those areas.
Well, and I think you were on that inner child journey, like you kind of said, long before you were working with psychedelic plant medicine. I know you've worked with cannabis throughout the years, but I also feel like a big part of you navigating your inner child dynamic or your healing process or coming to terms with making room for all of yourself at the table was through your time spent in nature, through your creativity, and then subsequently through your play. And then all of that ended up being expanded to include plant medicine once you progressed on that journey past a certain point.
I think in looking back, there's much more clarity than there was living it. But definitely, I question where I would be today if I didn't have my arts, my sports, and not even plant-based medicines. I wasn't really.
Well, what's the connection between nature and creativity for you?
I think we're just all creative beings in whichever environment we're put in, and I think nature's the most harmonious one to be in. We can be creative anywhere, and I've always tapped into that, whether it was drawing, painting, photography, cooking, building, gardening,
playing with the land. I know that you view working outside.
Well, because I think in the biology and the connection with the plants, I can feel it. That's why I became more connected to actually growing things and being in the forest, is because there's a relationship there. It's a give and take. Like there's a response and an interchange.
Mm-hmm. I like the idea of switching the order of those words and just saying that our nature is creativity also.
Mm-hmm. I think we were born in the image of and the creator. We are creators. I think it's just a part of all of us. And we often underestimate that capacity. I think we often see creativity as an accomplishing something great, but it's not. It's just making new out of what we got. Being innovative, being exploring.
It can be, many different things.
Many things. So, and I think,
Did you spill your drink, Alana?
Yeah, I broke the glass. So it sounds like we're saying that nature and creativity are very much so one and the same. And that like we are creators. So from that aspect, I think I love that we've kind of got this inner child theme going here with the creativity and the play and the mother-daughter between the two of you with like being raised in a place so grounded in nature. What do you feel the psychology of play is on the inner child journey to either of you?
I think there's a dynamic connection between discovery and inner child play. Nature, it's, I think, kids' nature to be creative. And in that creativity, they get to practice so much in life. Risk taking, just in the discovery of the do's and the don'ts, the ups and the downs, finding limits. It's all best to do that in the younger they are, the better, and not keep them so protected or comforted or safe. Like to free range the kids in safe environments so they
If you guys ever wonder why I turned out the way I turned out,
so they learn these lessons.
she just free ranged us.
With safeguards
Free
in
range
place,
children.
right? Well, I had some experiences working in daycare centers where it was always encouraged, like you go up the ladder, down the slide. I'd say that like 200 times in a day, reminding these 3-year-olds, 2-year-olds. Because you know how many of them want to go up the slide? No. Prohibitive in our culture, right? Got to keep them all safe. But in nature, they get to explore and discover. They get to know that knives are sharp and fire's hot. Gravity, like sticks are pokey.
And you can look at the psychology of all of that is like we have those 7-year cycles of when we get programmed as children. There's 3 of them, and we're imprinted. And the more that we get conditioned and programmed and patterned and restricted and formed and structured, the school system's really great at it. The more that happens, I tend to view it like the more you have to undo later on, the more I have to unlearn in order to get back to the true essence of who I am. So for me, I don't really see any type of psychology occurring, whether that's therapeutic, beneficial, or anything like that, without going back to your childhood or your inner child, or however you want to word it, the situations and experiences that formed and shaped who you are in childhood. I think our inner child work and psychology's role in therapy or plant medicine or communing in sacred space, all of that anchors back into our childhood in some capacity, which I guess just speaks to for me, like the innate connection between these things. Like you don't ever stop learning through play. Just at some point, our society has told us that adults don't learn through play. Adults learn by sitting here reading this book. It's like, no, human creatures are essentially just evolving little sponges. And yes, how we learn and how easily we learn changes down the road. But our evolution is based off of us trying things out and playing. And I think what has caused a lot of dissonance in our society, in the Western world, is the idea that we should be anything other than bumbling babies in the forest, trying our best not to die off of the wrong berry and playing in a stream. Like, we are still learning through play. We just have distorted and perverse ideas of what play is now compared to what is socially acceptable for adults. So I think what you have done really well for your children is keep the idea of play and connectivity to a nature as intrinsic parts of who we are. Like, we never had that fully stamped out in us. I play all the time because I learn through play. When you have fun and you're enjoying your discovery, that childlike awe, your information retention is huge because you're immersed, you're involved, you're showing up. You're not conditioned and programmed and scared and buffered and capped and limited and described and boxed. You're just doing your damn self, which is your nature, and you are creating simultaneously an experience in which you are experiencing, and then you do all of that through play.
And in saying all of that, we can't deny our culture and our societies do that. That's just what they're designed to do. We get boxed, we get birthed somewhere, and where we're planted, that's where we grow, right? And that's just a consequence of the structures around us. Then we get birthed into, like, those first 7 years is when the default mode network gets hardwired into place. Huge, pivotal. I was aware of that. I wanted to buffer and influence that as much as I could basically do. Set out a cornucopia full of opportunities. I trusted they'd figure out what they'd like, what they didn't like. I knew enough back then not to stereotype and limit and, and they just free range them. They figured it out. Keep them safe.
Well, and I think this is what the power of plant medicine can do, especially mushrooms. It can really start to unravel some of those conditions, some of those patterns that society has put on us, so that we can tap into these states easier, so that we can tap into just experiencing our authentic expression in the moment, whether that is happy, joy, tra-li-la, or a harder emotion or a difficult experience, or going back into our childhood and working through and repainting different perspectives on previous experiences that have shaped us from there. I know that that is the structure that Alana and I work with when we are designing retreats like our Once Upon a Mushroom retreat, Return of the Inner Child, that's coming up shortly. But Alana, what are your thoughts on mushrooms' role with inner child work? Because it's really fundamental, I know, in our discussions of working with mushrooms as a plant medicine.
Yeah, no, I think the interesting thing about mushrooms is they kind of naturally have this childlike nature to them. Um, and if you talk to people around the world, a lot of them kind of like in different cultures call them the children. I live in Mexico
Mhm.
now. That's something they commonly refer to. And yeah, they kind of bring out this essence. They kind of like, I feel like when working with them, they give us that option to kind of remove some of those conditioning levels so that we can really fine tune and get back to like that core essence that is us, like you said, that uninhibited version that just gets to be a part of nature and playful. And there's a lightheartedness about that gets lost by all the different layers of conditioning that we have. And you know, conditioning comes from a means of trying to keep us safe. And you know, then we end up carrying all these programs around with us that, you know, for a reason, and we don't need them. You know, they're not actually really helping us. They're just holding us back from enjoying life. You know, life becomes heavy, life becomes dark, life doesn't become exciting and experiential. And we have to go back to those places in childhood, those foundational moments that were set where we chose some sort of coping mechanism and rewire them and re-experience through the body, through play, through being totally and utterly ourselves, those foundations, you know, rebuilt. So, yeah, I think it's very potent medicine. I think absolutely you can work with inner child with every other kind of plant medicine as well, but I do feel that mushrooms has a kind of a special affinity when used in that way.
Well, I think for me, my perspective of that, it's because it brings in that lighthearted energetic of play. If you're going in there to work with a version of you that's stuck at 6 years old, and you go in there with this hard, heavy handed expectations of your adult self saying, we're going to do this and fix this and heal this, like, that's not a frequency my 6 year old would respond to. Like,
True,
that's just a
right?
whole extra list of expectations. So the joy that I experience, like, everything in life is already hard enough, like you just talked about. We have wounds, we have all of these dynamics. Yes, we can talk about that density, that heaviness, those obligations and those emotions, and the weight of being human is huge, right? We don't need to make it harder by having this dictatorial, intense approach to healing. It's more like, okay, let's go in here and feel it out. Let's play it out. Who are you? What do you need? Let's meet. Let's explore with that childlike explorative curiosity that gives you room in that moment for that experience with less expectations being put on yourself, your younger self or your current self to behave, do. And it's just a big old permission slip for your authentic self.
That's how I have seen and understood many people describe their journeys, especially with mushrooms, is to the opportunity to go back and bring their inner child back into the light. To
Return of the inner child.
Yeah, to say, you know, I've got your back. Now that I've, you know, experienced this, I see where you've been, and I understand why there's joy here and fun in that, and you really like this, and to reconnect to that playfulness that maybe you tucked away because it wasn't safe, to be proud of something because it was like, oh, you know, it was cast aside as being superfluous or immaterial.
Childish.
Childish.
God forbid. God forbid the 5-year-old.
So you saved it and protected it, you know? And I can see how in ceremony, going back with full permission in a childlike manner to just reach out into the, you know, to bridge that gap, to bring your inner child back into the light. That's how I've often viewed my journey, because as an adult, well, we've learned skills and techniques, and you know, that's the nice thing.
Well, and as adults, it gives us an opportunity to realize that some of those situations that we perceived certain ways as children were not innately malicious. They were just something that ourselves at that age did not comprehend the depths of. It was beyond us. And that unknown factor for kids and for adults, oh my God, that unknown factor for humans trusting the unknown is not a forte we have. We have innate fear responses when we don't understand, when we're confused, and when we're afraid. And I think it gives me, in my experience, an opportunity to look back on the perceived perpetrators in dynamics as just people doing their best in which I responded a certain way to, or it creates more of a neutral approach to situations and perspectives as opposed to anchoring me into a good or bad polarity all the time. It allows that distance and objectivity. And I think learning that in ceremony, especially with mushrooms, has then allowed me to apply that to my everyday reactions and responses, is that no, this is not always a malicious intent. These are just humans blindly bumping into each other. So it gives that undertone of grace and love as opposed to why is everyone out to get me, and that victim consciousness that we often talk about.
It certainly puts a spotlight on a different connection there, to be able to see it in a different light and that have that grace in that space for those other relationships, and to see it in a more objective way.
Mm-hmm.
I like what you were saying there, Alana, about the indigenous cultures using them in different ways. And I'm just thinking of Maria Sabina down in Mexico. She would always, I guess, pick two mushrooms, were like always a pair of two children to go into journey together. And I thought that was just so interesting. And when I asked the people I was with, how come, and like a good shaman, he went, well, I don't know. And it's like, okay, so nice,
This is the way that it works.
This is the way it works. And I thought, you know what, as a kid, you always want to have your buddy with you. You always want to go in tandem. It's always better to play, well, not better to play, but yeah, with someone, or to explore together. And I just thought
it's the buddy system.
Very playful part, maybe. I don't know. That's just was my own intuition on that one. But
I love that. Yeah, it's interesting that like mushrooms kind of they feel kind of like plural, like we always refer to them as plural, like other plant medicines, we don't really do that. But it's like
yeah,
mushrooms are referred to that way. They feel like a group mentality. They feel very collective. Whereas I found, working with grandmother medicine or even cannabis, it just feels more like a singular entity. So I love that, like that kind of community aspect there. That's really neat.
In the biologicals, we've got those fairy rings of the mushrooms that circle. We have the mycelium, the interconnectedness of the whole,
Well, and it really speaks to, we talk about this often, about just the power of herbalism, the power of observation, that nature is your biggest teacher. And of course, it's a very shamanistic answer to be like, oh, that's just the way that it is. But I truly believe that that's just the way that it is informed through all of those extrasensory perceptions of the energetics of mushrooms. It's also really interesting to see the as without, so within dynamic, that we usually have multiple inner children. There's multiple parts of us. There's multiple dynamics frozen in different emotional states and there's multiple versions of us in there that they're in there working with regardless also. So I definitely relate and see that the pluralness of mushrooms. And I've not thought about it that way. So that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of a new dynamic too. I was like, oh, that's fascinating. But they do seem to come in groups, and yeah, they do seem to bring this collective. And I mean, you look at mushrooms and the way their networks work, and like you said, their fairy rings and all the things. Like, I mean, it's obvious that it's there, all those fractals, all those different symbols, the way it shows up. But yeah, no, I think that interestingly enough, I think that is what brings it such well suited to this inner child work, for sure.
I know that working with mushrooms in my own journey is what has caused me to want to pair them with inner child work intentionally in ceremony, because I know that those are the dynamics that they've assisted with me in my journey on a personal level. And I've worked through cycles and patterns and dynamics with mushrooms around inner child dynamics and that permission slip, that play, that I will make room for all of you at this table. And in spite and because of all of the behaviors you might bring, like maybe you are too loud, maybe you are too big, maybe you are in the way, too much this, not enough that, all of these judgments that have been placed in my past on how I might have shown up in a moment, mushrooms have really enabled me on that inner journey there to allow for a level of chaos at the table. It's given that radical acceptance because they kind of just tickle the chaos out of a situation, and there's that cosmic joke element, that humor, that lightness, that childlike play that I really rely on as an antidote to some really heavy internal patterns. Like, it's already, like I mentioned before, it's already hard enough. If I can get a little giggle out of it while it's going down, it can shift a lot of the energetics.
And you almost have to, like, it's, like, it's like that paradox. It's like, to feel the heavy shit, you need to bring the love and the joy to it, like it's a beautiful, beautiful childlike way to heal, really, right? And like you said earlier, when you're working with your inner child, you really do need to approach it with that soft hand and the way that that child's going to think. And it can't be heavy-handed, like, from the adult, that way, really, right? So to be able to have that grace and that love and that play and that joke, that laughter, that medicine that is so potent that we often forget to do, I think, as we get older, just because, things get heavier, right?
Not take ourselves so seriously all the time, and to be able to enjoy laughing at ourselves and seeing the humorous things and the things we can still do.
Well, we've all, I think, have had experience with microdosing mushrooms. I know Mom and I have. Alana, you've microdosed on occasion too.
Yep.
And I think
Absolutely.
When we discuss things like our mushroom retreat, Once Upon a Mushroom, Return of the Inner Child, that is coming up and we'll start having more conversations about here shortly. But those are big mushroom journeys, right? Those are adventures. Those are dynamics. We're talking a hero journey process over multiple days with incredible facilitation. There's huge juice in those moments. But a beautiful thing about mushrooms is that they can work with you in a daily, regular, mundane capacity in smaller, gentler ways, which is what I think has such power when we're looking at psilocybin as a medicine, is because it can travel with us through those very large, big experiences, but can also ground us in that trust, in that frequency of love and connectivity, and beyond our regular 3D perception. It can do that in our everyday mundane life. It's a very humanity evolution friendly medicine. And it's similar to how I feel about cannabis, is that the medicine that the mushroom provides and the frequency has adapted and grown and changed with humanity over the years as we've cultivated, worked with, and participated with them as a medicine. But I really love that mushrooms can be and do such incredible guiding profoundness in both the macro and the micro sense.
Absolutely. No, I think it's a very underutilized area. I mean, people are starting to microdose quite a bit more. I think it's great. And I think it's important, that people, they feel called to do some research and explore with, because like you said, you don't get a lot of opportunities to integrate this into your everyday life and to really get to play in that realm of everyday with the support of a plant medicine. And yeah, cannabis and psilocybin, they're accessible. Dosing wise, I think scientifically speaking, we've got that kind of dialed in for most people. I'm not saying I've never been taken on a, kind of more of an intense trip from a microdose before. I'm sure we all have. But, it's fairly predictable in a lot of ways. And yeah, there's so much beauty when, like, you're experiencing the same thing that you do every day, but from a completely different lens, whether it's, going for a walk or washing dishes or, spending time with a loved one. It can bring a different lens and tap you into vibrations that are healing, that are, available to us all the time, but that we maybe don't allow in because of our wounding.
Yeah, it's definitely, I just love the concept of micro pivots as opposed to revolutionizing your life. And I think it's because the Western culture we live in has a lot of those one-stop shop magical pill ideas, right? I know we work a lot with those concepts and having to undo our programming around that when we approach plant medicine, because that is not what these plant spirits offer. This is not a one-stop shop. But I can see people with the larger ceremonies or the retreats still bring in that energy of, oh, I'm going to do this and it's going to fix me. And I think we talk about that a lot and how that's not what occurs, but having that microdose option too brings in those pauses, those potent pauses in your mundane life, like you said, to see that magic. And for me, in my experience and the journey I've been on, it is in those moments that I have changed my life. It is not in the tent, in the ceremony. It is in those tiny moments of decision, of awareness, of pause, of intention. Those are what truly has revolutionized and healed parts of me that are not always integratable after a larger ceremony. Of course, I'm an avid believer of both. We facilitate large medicine ceremonies. There is huge potent power. But I think I love the microdose approach, and even cannabis with consistent and microdosing dynamics as well, of the power in the small moment, of that gentle pivot, of the little moments. There's a part of that for me, I think, should be highlighted in our Western culture because it gives that opposition to the magic pill approach.
Oh my gosh, yeah, the psychology behind that's so fascinating, that magic pill. I mean, you just look at marketing online and that's like, I'm not, exempt from this, you scroll online, they hook you all the time as you're scrolling and the quick fixes and the things you click on really, right? And so it's fascinating, I think, with Alchemia, having, trying to find a way to merge with this collective psychology that wants that quick fix, but then working to change that narrative and that belief system within the collective as well. That that's not the point. That's not the point of life, even, let alone the way that's going to fix you. And I think that comes full circle back around to the nature conversation, which is that, all things happen in due time, and nature reflects us back to us in every way. It's an interesting world out there, the way we look at
I just often view that as the silver bullet effect, the quick fix now, and it's just never been that way for me at all. And it's I've microdosed a couple times at different times in my life, and it's been a very informative reality to experience that, as opposed to like the heavy, bigger ceremonial journeys, because I really had enjoyed, because I have a history of ADHD and being quite anxious and hyper, and I never really knew that was considered mental illness, or these things weren't diagnosed.
It was your normal.
Well, 100% my normal. Yeah. It was my greatest gifts, to be a dyslexic and have ADHD and I'm OCD maybe. Who knows? There's a whole litany of diagnoses you can get these days, but that was just my normal. But in order to be able to understand more now just what anxiety is, I can see that's probably what I've been experiencing my whole life. But not knowing, sports, art, creativity always was my solve for that when I was younger. So having discovered microdosing, objectify it so much nicer, to get that distance between what was occurring and the energy behind it, and just giving that little bit of a pause to see it in a calmer light, and to sort of have time to respond rather than just to react. And it was like, wow, that's pretty cool. And I think, because I've never taken any other kind of pharmaceutical microdosing is revolutionizing mental health, because people are actually curing things themselves from the inside out, rather than waiting for the silver bullet effect from medicines, because they're lifetime prescriptions. And they're just functional, practical ways of integrating the skills and insights and awarenesses that you get from maybe the bigger journeys. And
well, I think if you could work with them, I know that this is our plan through Alchemia, to incorporate both dynamics and have a hero's journey, and then have an opportunity to work with microdosing mushrooms to continue on the integration of what you experienced in that larger ceremony. Because so much can happen in a large ceremony that you'll often hear people emphasize integration. And we actually just did one of our previous podcast episodes on the topic of integration, because that's such a vast thing. First of all, integration is not one thing. There's not one thing you do and now you're doing the integration. There is different approaches, all these different practices, but I think something that could work on a very deep, energetic, emotional, and vibrational level would be the continuation of working with those mushrooms in a microdosing capacity, because it gives you an anchor back into the frequencies you are experiencing that are so much beyond just a cognitive decision, because our patterning, because of our conditions, our environments, our what has made us who we are to this day, right? Those things have been established over years. And then to just expect you to revolutionize your life after one experience, it will revolutionize your perspectives, but there's a follow through that is involved in integration. And I think working with microdose of mushrooms of psilocybin to integrate, bring home, and revisit those frequencies from a hero journey with mushrooms is a really exciting way that Alana and I facilitate and involve in our ceremony, is to have that continuation, that focus on the return home, that focus on integration. Even before we start, it is in our preparation, the emphasis on integration. The ceremony itself is just part of the whole process. It's not even really the focus.
Well, it's bringing it back home and bringing it into the body and feeling it. And it takes a long time for that body and those cells to get rewired. It doesn't, the insights come, like you say. But
well, and that brings us to the beginning, like Alana just pointed out, is like that involution back to nature, back to our nature, back to that radical acceptance and permission to go through the steps of the process. The process is the point. There's nothing else that you're waiting to happen. Like the process,
not a cosmic joke.
Yeah, this is really paradoxical. It's literally about the journey. The destination doesn't matter. And man, I used to hate that saying. Like, to my core, enjoy the journey. It's not about the dead. I'm like, what does that even mean? I didn't like it, but it's really true, especially, and I can see that very clearly in regards to plant medicine. Is like, no, it's really, you're not aiming at some fine, finished, refined, perfect version of yourself. It is just the process. It's just the journey. That's all that there is.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we can project ahead and imagine, sure.
Yeah, but you're never going to get there.
No, because tomorrow comes and there's always more tomorrows, assumably, until there's not. But then that continues on too, I hear. So
I think the last thing that we want to talk about, because I know we've alluded to it a few times, is the Once Upon a Mushroom Return of the Inner Child retreat that Alchemia is hosting, and that Tammy, my oh so dear mother, is going to be co-facilitating with us.
Yes.
Which is very exciting.
We're so excited to have you bring your beautiful childlike play essence with us.
I am so looking forward to sitting in ceremony with people and just holding space and being with.
Yeah, it is really beautiful to have the opportunity to witness. Especially like we talked about, just people arriving on the land and their pivots and their it's like a thawing, sinking into presence when you're in nature. That is really magical to experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's going to be a very jam-packed 3.5-4 day long ceremony. There is a lot of somatic practices. Like I said, Alchemia as a whole really focuses on empowerment and embodiment. There is a lot of tangible, practical tools that apply and allow that space in your everyday life, I think, which is one of the reasons why I'm so excited. I'm also really excited because it's an opportunity to change some of the perspectives we have about showing up and doing that inner work. We can bring that play, we can bring that lightheartedness and that joy to this dynamic. It can be a creative, exciting journey that you get to do with your friends. There is a connectivity that comes from working with mushrooms in nature like this, of being able to sit in circle and really truly feel like you are part of something bigger than you. And for me, in my experience of holding space, that is some of the most potent and powerful energies and shifts and pivots, is that true understanding that you are not separate from a whole, and that level of play and excitement that gets ignited in an individual when they realize that for me is what this retreat is about. It's rekindling that fire and that excitement for our lives It's allowing all of you to show up, that authentic spark, that play, that joy, to give all of the little kids a seat at the table. We're going to have a kids' table with crafts and activities where they can be as noisy as they need to be, and they will be held. It's exciting. I think it's exciting because it's potent in my life, because we've done this work, because Once Upon a Mushroom, the return of the inner child is just a culmination of our heart's desire to bring people together and feel whole and loved and connected.
And
That
in
is
nature,
it.
of course. That
Yeah.
aspect
And
is
in
super
nature.
important.
Yes.
Mhm.
It's just a harmony that's resounds. It's beautiful. I look so forward to being in community with like-minded people, seeking, exploring, discovering. I love watching those moments. And they're all different for everybody. Everyone gets their nuggets, and their stories.
Ripley is also
Ripley likes
excited.
it too.
All right, ladies, I think that wraps up our conversation about nature, creativity, and play. Alana, it's always a pleasure. My mother, dear Tammy, the Tammy and Tamtera, we are really grateful and excited that you're our first person on our podcast.
I am blessed and
Thank
honored
you.
and so grateful to have been invited, and I appreciate the new year that's coming and all these exciting
Yes.
things that are happening. So,
of course. And for anyone who is watching or listening, be sure to check out the description below. You will have all of the links where you can check out Once Upon a Mushroom, Return of the Inner Child. Alchemia has a fresh and squeaky brand new website that should be available for you to take a look at. And you are more than welcome to join us on all of our social platforms that are linked below. Thank you for being here, and we will see you all back here very shortly.